Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, Volume 2, The Establishment of the Ayyubid State. Start of Chapter 5, Part 1. Economic reforms and types of expenditure. Salahuddin's state enjoyed abundance and easy living because its sources of income were many and various. We may list these sources as follows. The vast treasures of the Fatimids available to him after Egypt came under his control. Income from the tax that came from non-Muslims. Ransoms paid by prisoners. Income from booty acquired through war. Income from land tax, which was taken from the inhabitants of lands conquered peacefully. In addition, there were other Islamically acceptable sources of income and other permissible sources of wealth. Salahuddin was not one of those sultans who spent wealth inappropriately. Rather, he spent it for the sake of Allah, building fortresses and citadels and other construction projects that benefited the state. His interest in agriculture and trade. In order to spare the land the woes of famine that could be caused by war, Salahuddin paid a great deal of attention to agriculture and irrigation so that the land could yield its best and offer all types of produce. Egypt and Greater Syria cooperated in an exchange of agricultural produce, reinforcing and strengthening the economy and supplying the army with necessary wealth. The two provinces stood side by side to confront the treacherous aggression of the Franks and to supply the Muslim army with everything it needed of food and weaponry. Salahuddin also paid a great deal of attention to trade. Egypt during his era was the link between East and West, and many European cities flourished because of this trade, such as the Italian cities of Venice and Pisa. Later on, the Venetians were permitted to establish a market in Alexandria. Salahuddin took a great interest in markets and paid attention to them so that the economy could flourish and productivity in his state could increase. He increased the number of markets in Egypt and Syria and paid attention to refurbishing and expanding them. The traveler Ibn Jubair visited some of these markets on his journey during the time of Salahuddin in 578 Hijri, and he recorded his admiration for their system. He said, speaking of the city of Aleppo, "As for the town, it is massively built and wonderfully disposed, and of rare beauty, with large markets arranged in long adjacent rows, so that you pass from a row of shops of one craft into that of another, until you have gone through all the urban industries. These markets are all roofed with wood, so that their occupants enjoy an ample shade, and all hold the gaze from their beauty, and halt in wonder those who are hurrying by. Most of the shops are in wooden warehouses of excellent workmanship." In his book Safarnama, Nasir Khusro described the city of Tripoli in Lebanon at the time of Salahuddin. It is a beautiful city, surrounded by farms and gardens, with a lot of sugar cane, orange, banana, and lemon tree, and hostelries with 4 or 5 or 6 stories. Its streets and markets are clean and beautiful, and you would think that every market is a beautiful palace. In the middle of the city there is a great congregational mosque, well kept and finely adorned, and solidly constructed. In the courtyard of the mosque there is a large dome, beneath which there is a marble cistern, with water coming out of a copper faucet, and in the marketplace there is a water fountain with 5 taps, from which a lot of water comes out, and the people take whatever they need. His interest in manufacturing. Salahuddin paid attention to the manufacture of weapons, textiles, fabrics, embroidered silk, finely crafted horse saddles, and glass. During his era, the manufacture of pottery, ships, fleets, and other things helped the economy to flourish, increased productivity, and gave extra strength to the state. Craftsmen and artisans during the Ayyubid era were among the most loyal to their inherited traditions. Groups of workers and craftsmen continued to follow the same systems and methods of manufacturing as had been used in previous era. The artisans were organized in guilds which protected their rights and supervised the execution of their duties in the most complete way. They had their guilds and traditions which everyone respected and which were supported by the state. One of the traditions of these guilds was keeping the secrets of that craft or trade and limiting it to the guild members and their families. Perhaps this explains the widespread phenomena of certain families specializing in a particular craft that was handed down from father to son, in addition to the difficulty for strangers to enter their ranks. Among the most famous centers of manufacturing during the Ayyubid era were the following. Cairo. The purpose behind the building of Cairo was not so that it could be the capital of the state or a homeland for every resident of Egypt. Rather, it was intended to be a place of residence solely for the caliph and his harem, troops, and inner circle, far away from the city of Fustat and its environs. After just 1 century at most, Cairo became an important city in which a society was soon established with all its classes and requirements, and all kinds of crafts and manufacturing spread throughout the city. These activities flourished through the Ayyubid era. It is clear that the markets of Cairo flourished during the era of An-Nasr Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, when the city was exposed to economic and social changes, which resulted in increased demand for market products in general. These developments also led to most of the changes that took place in the city's markets during that period. Among the most prominent of these changes was the development of specialization in the markets. For every type of product, there was a market that specialized in it. This was an organizational method that began to be adopted at the time of Salahuddin, when it may be noted that most of the main markets that appeared during the Ayyubid era specialized in selling one type of good product. This phenomena was unknown before the Ayyubid era. For example, there were markets where only sewn clothes, furniture, and so on were sold. The great Souk al-Jamaloon was founded at the time of Salahuddin. This market specialized in selling silk cloth. Other markets specialized in selling bridal trousseaux and bracelets. A market also appeared between the two palaces, selling weapons, bows, arrows, knives, and other kinds of weapons that soldiers needed. Other markets, such as Ash-Sharabashiyin and Al-Khawayisiyin appeared, which sold military uniforms and clothing, as well as the cloaks which the Sultan gave to emirs, viziers, and judges. Some of the markets and crafts were moved from Fustat to Cairo. This phenomena was something natural, because it became permitted for the masses and ordinary people to live in Cairo at the time of Salahuddin. A number of merchants and craftsmen found the opportunity to move to Cairo in order to practice their trades there, near the officials and emirs of the state, after the state dismantled the craftsman system that had existed during the Fatimid era. This led to a large number of craftsmen moving to the various markets to work there. This undoubtedly contributed to the increase and development of manufacturing activity in Cairo, which in turn contributed to the flourishing of trade based on manufacturing at the time of An-Nasir Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. Fustat. It may be said that the fire which started by Shawar in 564 Hijri almost destroyed Fustat completely, were it not for the Ayyubids' efforts to save it. From the time Asad ad-Din Shirkuh became vizier, he showed an interest in rebuilding it. Then this mission was continued after his death by his nephew Salahuddin, who paid a great deal of attention to Fustat, renovating its mosques and principal buildings and building schools in the city. He crowned these efforts by incorporating it with Cairo in one city wall, thus offering protection to both. As a result of this attention, the city gradually began to be built up. The opportunities for building in Fustat were good from the time of Salahuddin, when buildings, markets and workshops were built in this area. The workshops of Fustat were called foundries, for instance the copper foundry, the steel foundry, and so on. There can be no doubt that the foundries were based in Fustat and produced both raw material and cast metal which were needed by the metal smithing industry in Egypt to produce weapons and war engines, in addition to household utensils and various kinds of decorative items. Tanees. Tanees is regarded as one of the most important centers of textile manufacture at the time of the Ayyubids. Many historians and travelers spoke highly of its textile manufacturing. It is worth mentioning that the people of Tanees remained active in manufacturing and trade until Al-Malik al-Kamil Muhammad ibn Ayyub destroyed it and demolished its walls and houses in 624 Hijri, that is 1226 Common Era. Other cities. Other cities which were famous as centers of manufacturing during the Ayyubid era included Damietta, Akhmim, Alexandria, Jazirat al-Rawdah, Damascus, Aleppo, and others. Abolition of levies and being content with Sharia sources of income. It comes as no surprise that there was nothing left in Salahuddin's treasury after he died except 46 silver dirhams and a single gold dinar. His state's income was huge, and his expenditure on war was also huge. The more lands that came under his control, the more his income from them and his spending on them increased. His principles were always as follows. 1. Abolishing illegitimate levies and taxes in all lands that he conquered. And 2. Being content with Islamically acceptable sources of income, such as zakah, jizya, tribute, booty, and the tithe, 1/10 on trade. The income from Egypt was his main source because he regarded it as his kingdom. Hence he abolished the Hajj levies that were taken from Maghribi pilgrims, and he abolished the levies on Yemeni merchants. He also abolished similar taxes in Damascus when he took control of it, and in Aleppo, Sanjar, and Raqqa. His financial policy appears in the statement that he issued when he abolished the levies in Raqqa. The worst of rulers is the one who lines his pockets at the people's expense. And the furthest from the right way is the one who takes what is not his from the people and regards it as his by right. The one who gives up something for the sake of Allah will be compensated by Allah, and the one who lends to Allah a goodly loan will be repaid by Him. When our venture ended in the conquest of Raqqa, we found out about the unlawful consumption of wealth and wrongdoing, which Allah has commanded be stopped. So we obliged ourselves and the governors, who are working for us, to waive all of these taxes. We have issued orders that all these doors be closed and abolished, and that the records of these taxes be erased from the department, and that both rich and poor be let off paying them forever. Thus the taxes were abolished, which the crusaders used to get from As-Salt, Al-Balqa, Jabal of, As-Sawad, and Al-Jawlan. The Franks used to take half of the taxes collected. Salahuddin restored the obligation of zakah, which the Fatimids had abolished, as a sign of the restoration of the Sunni madhab, making it an alternative to the illegitimate levies and taxes. He paid attention to the collection of zakah. He set up a department for it and appointed someone in charge of it, but the collection of zakah was little. Zakah was levied and collected on gold, silver, trade goods, livestock, and crops, with exceptions for foodstuffs such as sesame, flax seeds, olive oil, and vegetables. Tribute was collected according to the system and set times of Egypt. When the need arose to change from following the Hijri calendar to the solar Coptic calendar in 567 Hijri, because the times for collection had started to come before the time of production, Salahuddin made this alteration. In other regions, such as Syria and Mesopotamia, the tribute was collected based on an area of land approximately equal to 1 acre. The tax on wheat and barley was 2.5 bushels for 1 acre. The tax was collected and then paid to the Sultan's department. The rate on fava beans and chickpeas was similar, and there were cash taxes on some harvests, such as grapes and other tree fruits, which varied between 1 and 5 dinars per acre. In the third year, it was no more than 3 dinars. Those with zimmi status paid the jizya, from which children, women, and monks were exempt. It was called the community tax, and varied according to the people's circumstances, between 1 and 4.5 dinars, in addition to 2.5 dirhams to be paid by all every year. Because metal and wood were essential for making weapons, Salahuddin forbade anyone to have anything to do with them, and strictly enforced the state monopoly in these materials, because he was in a state of war with the Franks, and the punishment for anyone who smuggled any of these materials was great indeed. Most of the state's income was spent on the war, fortresses, citadels, schools, mosques, border posts, inns on the roads, hospices, salaries for state employees, and so on. Hospitals at the time of Salahuddin. In Salahuddin's time, there were no schools of medicine per se. Rather, this specialty was taught in the hospitals. After a lecture, the student would go and see patients to learn how to diagnose and treat disease. Salahuddin built a number of hospitals during his reign, including the following. The Nasiri Hospital in Cairo. Salahuddin built a Nasiri Hospital in Cairo, choosing one of the splendid palaces and turning it into a huge hospital. He chose for this purpose a palace that was located far away from noisy areas. Dr. Ahmed Isa explains. An-Nasiri or As-Salahi Hospital, or the Hospital of Salahuddin, when the Sultan Salahuddin took over Egypt in 567 Hijri, that is 1171 Common Era. He took control of the palace of the Fatimids. In the palace there was a hall which had been built by Al-Aziz Billah in 384 Hijri, that is 994 Common Era. Sultan Salahuddin made it a hospital, and it was the oldest hospital in the palace. Al-Qadi al-Fadil said concerning the events of 577 Hijri, that is 1181 Common Era. Al-Qadi al-Fadil said concerning the events of 577 Hijri, that is 1181 Common Era. The Sultan Salahaddin Yusuf ibn Ayyub ordered that a hospital be opened for the sick and weak, and he chose a place in the palace. A monthly income of 200 dinars was allocated to it from the chancery, as well as some income from Fayoum, an agricultural region in Egypt. He employed in it doctors, oculists, surgeons, a supervisor, a worker and a servant, and people found great comfort and benefit in it. A Nasiri hospital was well furnished, and was one of the finest palaces. It contained all that was needed for the treatment and comfort of its patients. The traveler Ibn Jubair described the hospital which Salahaddin built in Cairo, saying, "Another of the things we saw, doing honor to the Sultan, was the hospital in the city of Cairo. It is a palace, goodly for its beauty and spaciousness. This benefaction he made seeking reward and the pleasure of Allah. He appointed as superintendent a man of science with whom he placed a store of drugs, and whom he empowered to use the potions and apply them in their various forms. In the rooms of this palace were placed beds, fully appointed for inpatients. At the disposal of the superintendent are servants whose duty it is, morning and evening, to examine the conditions of the sick and to bring them the food and potions that befit them. Facing this establishment is another especially for sick women, and they also have persons to attend to them. A third which adjoins them, a large place, has rooms with iron windows, and it also has been taken as a place of confinement for the insane. They also have persons who daily examine their condition and give them what is fitting for them. All these matters the Sultan oversees, examining and questioning and demanding the greatest care and attention to them. Ali Mubarak Pasha said, "When the Sultan Salahaddin Yusuf ibn Ayyub came to power, he allocated different parts of the Caliph's palace to his emirs to live in, and he allocated other parts as a hospital. This was the hospital that was known as Al-Atiq, which means the ancient. He put its entrance in the quarter of Al-Milukhiyah, which was the quarter of the commander-in-chief in the past. Its location is the place that is now known as Dar Ghumri al-Husri, along with neighboring houses, as we have found in the title deeds. It is at the end of the quarter, in the direction of the small gate in the direction of Qasr Shawk. From it one enters the ancient hospital." With regard to the doctors who worked in An-Nasiri hospital, among the most famous of them were Radiyaddin al-Rahbi, Ibrahim ibn al-Rais Mamun, ibn Abi Usaybiyah, Shaykh al-Sadid ibn Abil Bayan, and Al-Qadi Nafis ad-Din ibn al-Zubair. The Hospital of Alexandria. This was built by Salahaddin when he entered Alexandria in 577 Hijri, and began to study Al-Muwatta with Sheikh Abu at-Tahir ibn Abi Auf, as well as establishing a place for the Maghribis and a school sponsored by his brother Turan Shah. The Salahi Hospital in Jerusalem. Salahaddin al-Ayyubi founded this hospital in 583 Hijri, that is 1187 Common Era, after he liberated Jerusalem from the crusaders and expelled them therefrom. The Encyclopedia of Palestine says, concerning the Salahi Hospital in Jerusalem, "It is part of the legacy of the Sultan Salahaddin al-Ayyubi. Salahuddin established it as an endowment and appointed senior doctors for it, and he established many endowments to support it. That hospital became one of the most famous hospitals of that period, and medicine was taught as well as practiced there. The Hospital of Acre. In 583 Hijri, after the Sultan Salahuddin conquered Jerusalem and rescued it from the clutches of the crusaders, he went to Damascus, taking a detour via Acre. When he reached Acre, he stayed in its citadel and appointed ad-Deen Karakush to renovate it, refurbish it, and restore its beauty. He turned the house of the Hospitallers into an endowment of two halves, for the poor and for scholars, and he turned the bishop's house into a hospital, establishing many endowments to provide an income for it. He put its Qadi, Jamaluddin ibn al-Sheikh Abu Najib, in charge of that, and went back to Damascus with a sense of achievement and pride. Regardless of size, one hospital might differ from another in terms of its style and decor, the size of the gardens attached to it, and the number of fountains it contained. Nevertheless, the hospitals also had a basic plan, according to which they all contained the following. 1. Sections which were just for men, and other separate sections just for women. 2. Different wards according to specialties. So there were wards that were just for patients affected by fevers, other wards for mental and psychological illness, others for eye diseases, and so on. 3. Special wards where those who were convalescing stayed until they were fully recovered. 4. Wards where doctors could examine patients who were unconscious. 5. Rooms for the head doctor and their administrators. 6. A lecture hall in which the head doctor gave his lessons and met with his students. 7. A library. 8. A kitchen for cooking healthy foods, as food was one of the means of treatment used, and also for making drinks and other remedies. 9. A pharmacy for preparing medicines. 10. Stores. 11. A room for washing the dead. 12. A prayer room or mosque. And 12. Toilets and baths. In addition, there were yards, courtyards and gardens containing fragrant trees and edible plants. Many of these hospitals also contained housing quarters for those who worked in them. End of part 1 of chapter 5.